Welcome back, whisky fans. I hope you've all got your Christmas shopping done, because there's not long left to go now. This is December the 17th, which is the 119th anniversary of the first flight of a heavier-than-air mechanically propelled aircraft. So of course we're talking about the Wright brothers in their maiden voyage in the Wright Flyer at Kitty Hawk in 1903. I always think it's amazing when I think about that not just that they performed that feat of the first mechanically propelled heavier-than-air flight, but back in 1903, it wasn't that long ago, and just think about all the things that mankind have achieved since. Especially when you consider that 1903, it was only around about a decade after that we went from that first kind of self-propelled flying deck chair at Kitty Hawk to the biplanes of the First World War, so armed dogfights above the trenches of Northern Europe. So again, a massive leap forwards, as well as a little bit of a step backwards. Anyway, dram number 17. Let's hope for another good one, because we haven't got that many left. Let's see what we've got. Label away, and in we go. Looks reasonably dark. Smells a bit odd. And into hat number 2 with you. Yeah, pretty dark. But that doesn't necessarily mean too much, as we said yesterday. It's another oaky one. What was that, 2 days ago we had that Irish whiskey that's matured in that charred bog oak cask, and that had a lot of sort of telltale signs and sort of the hallmarks of an American whiskey for me, which was a little bit of a red herring, so obviously it was an Irish whiskey. This one I'm getting probably an equal or slightly greater extent of fresh, spicy oak spice on the nose. Also getting a little bit of a jelly sweets note. So I would be tempted to guess either a world whiskey perhaps, or maybe a new distillery, maybe a young distillery that's using very active oak, or possibly red wine STR casks, something like that. Definitely lots of oak spice, jammy red fruit notes. But not the sort of thing that you get from sherry, more the sort of thing, like I said, that you get from an STR red wine cask. I do think it's sad in a way that a lot, and I've probably mentioned this before, that a lot of new distilleries seem to go down that route of STR red wine casks in particular, or just virgin fresh oak to get a lot of oak spice to cover up the immaturity. I think it's a shame that they do that. I don't know if it's obviously something that they've got in their heads, which is a good way to disguise how young a whiskey is. But for me, it just seems like a bit of a trick. Nice nuttiness coming through on this one. Nutty, fruity, confectionery, lots of oak spice. I think the nuttiness, I do think that it's a single malt or a single malt type whiskey. Doesn't seem like a blend to me. But I do think there's a strong chance that this might be a world whiskey, or one of those very new young distilleries perhaps. I say that because I'm thinking about things like the Lindores Abbey. They use those STR red wine casks, and that gives it a similar flavour profile to some of those newer world whiskey distilleries. Nice dry earthiness to this whiskey though. So everything is telling me that this is probably a young whiskey, but it's a fairly well made one. Let's see how it tastes. There's definitely been some messing around with this one. It's got quite a medicinal quality, but not like your medicinal Isle of Peat. More like a medicine that's had some sort of flavouring applied to it to cover up the fact that it's not very pleasant. That sounds awful. In hindsight, I wish I hadn't said that, but there you go. Bitter, herbal, confectionery, jelly sweets, a little bit of a bitter cherry note, oaky, but I think the oakiness really takes a back seat to those sweet, jelly sweet notes. The finish is bitter, but actually pretty long. It really lingers quite a long time. So for an ABV on this one, at least 43%, perhaps 43 to 46. More of that nuttiness coming through on the nose now. And I think for me, that's really the highlight of this whiskey. I like that nutty peanut note. Towards the late palate and the finish, I'm actually getting some quite well matured notes. Sort of contradicts the notes that you get earlier on in the palate. But I'm getting a growing maltiness, just some nice barley grain notes. So as for what this is, I'm going to say fairly young, probably well below 10 years old, and possibly a world whiskey. It seems like it's from a distillery that's not really following like the traditional Scottish single malt style. I don't think that it's an English whiskey. It's definitely not an Irish whiskey. Probably not an American whiskey. I think this is going to be from one of the new guys. I think this is going to be something different. So it's another Mackmyra, and I cannot pronounce that because I am English. I'm going to have a go. Bjorksav. I think that's an S on the label. Bjorksav, something like that. It is 46.1%, so that's another excellent presentation coming from Mackmyra Distillery, which is obviously out there in Sweden. So it's an odd one, but it's very different. And what I like about Mackmyra is that they're not doing what a lot of other countries do, like England in particular is heavily influenced by Scotch whisky, and I think you could even argue that India is following a very Scotch-centric model, and Japan, of course, are heavily influenced by the Scottish distilleries. Mackmyra over in Sweden, they're really not. They're doing their own thing. They're not taking too much guidance from the history of what other people have done before. They really are their own individual spirit. And I don't actually know what this Bjorksav is. That's probably not how you pronounce it at all. I'm going to do a little bit of research, find out what that is. Well, the first answer is it's quite expensive, because even though it is 46.1%, yeah, 46.1, it sells for £55 a bottle. So that's more than I'd pay for this. So it says here that this expression features whiskey aged in bourbon casks. Yeah, I suppose so. Oloroso sherry casks. Yeah, in hindsight there is the fingerprints of Oloroso on this. And even casks that previously held Swedish birch sap wine. So that's an interesting one. Birch sap wine. I think in hindsight there is a little bit of something like a sweet white dessert wine on the nose of this one. Something reminiscent of the Tokay wine cask, or possibly even like a, not quite as sweet, but kind of like a sweet Sauterne wine. So it's good that that sweet birch sap wine that they say that they've used for this one. It's good that you've got clear evidence that that has an effect on the whiskey. Very, very interesting. And as I said when I was tasting it, very different, and I'm really glad that they are really breaking the mould and doing their own thing with Swedish whisky. Saying that, not the kind of thing that I would probably buy, especially not at £55, but I'm glad to have tried it. If you have tried this one, let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.